All right, I hope folks had a good week and weekend. Nobody got any, really sick or anything. That always sucks. Uh, Today or this week we're going to be talking about Mesoamerica. But before we do that, I wanted to mix in there as well, just show a little bit of people's projects that they've turned in for the second project, and I wanted to revisit the tools of artistic critique and talk about that a little bit, and then we'll dive in with the other stuff. Let's see. All right. Would any of you guys like to talk a little bit about your project that you turn in? I'm going to share my screen with a discussion, and so I won't be able to see if you flail your hand around. But if you'd like to talk about it, just say something. Let's see. Like Jacob, would you mind talking a little bit about the standard of Ur, what your
Yeah,
project was?
so the project was a discovery project. I want to recreate it in like the digital art form, in a sense.
Okay.
And when I was researching it and starting up my discovery project, I didn't know that there were two of them.
Oh, very cool.
Because the one that I chose was war, and the other one was called peace.
Okay.
So
Were there two, or are they just different? I thought it was two different faces of the same thingamajig.
I think I'm not too sure if I can
Okay.
recall, but it might have been on one uh, it might have been one piece, but I just chose one side of the piece.
Okay. All right. Cool. Can everybody see this? I have Jacob's thing in a PDF open. Can you guys see that? Okay. And so how did you recreate this digitally?
I used in I used a digital art app called Procreate to recreate it.
Oh, okay. Very cool. All right. Nicely done. Let's see. Anybody else here who submitted something into the discussion board with their project who would like to talk about it? Looks like only a couple people did, and that's fine. It's we'll get a chance to talk about them more. I think what's really kind of fun is seeing just here. There's only a couple, but like this is a digital recreation of one of the objects we looked at. This person is researching Viking and Nordic stuff, and this person is doing a presentation on tattooing in the ancient world. And it looks like to me that this is an image of the Iceman, the individual who was found in the mountains in Europe, whose body was, I think, if I remember right, about 11,000 years old. And when people looked at his tattoos and the different things in his pouch, they found out that the natural herbs that were in his pouch actually were known treatments for the ailments that his body showed that he had, and that the tattoos were actually applied to acupressure points to deal with the issues that his body showed as well, which I think is really kind of interesting. So that's pretty interesting. All right. I think what you guys come up with for the projects is always fascinating. whenever you guys do stuff. For this class, remember the projects need to be related to what we cover in the modules in the time frame that this class covers. And if you're doing research, it needs to be an essay with at least 8 images in it. It needs to be an annotated bibliography, or it needs to be a PowerPoint presentation done in video format so we can hear your narration. And then for the discovery projects, doing your things like what Jacob did is great. We're just kind of a PDF reporting on what he did, or if you create a video or anything like that. If you have any doubt, get a hold of me and we'll talk about it, because I'm usually pretty good at sorting that out since I have an in with the person who does the grading. Okay, today we are going to be talking about Mesoamerica. I really like this kind of stuff. I think people are really surprised at the artwork that comes out of this period, and folks are confused with the time frames that we're talking about too. But I really enjoy finding out this kind of stuff, because when my ancestors moved here hundreds of years ago, it was in the government at the time, it was in their best interest to pretend that the people here did not have much of a civilization. Because the standard exchange, if there was another culture that you were meeting, was to treat the other people as equals. And because this was essentially a land grab, they couldn't do that. And that's when governments address sovereign nations as tribes, and their kings, queens, emperors, and presidents as chiefs. And it was, there is absolutely no coincidence that those terms were used. Those terms were also used by colonizers in the continent of Africa, because I think that it shows a distinct lack of respect for the sovereignty of the nations that are being engaged with. And that comes from personal observation, but it's I was raised with Shoshone sister and 3 Dene brothers, and it's interesting to me that the sovereign nations that early Americans encountered were labeled. They were treated as sovereign nations towards the beginning, but by the mid 1800s, you start seeing very dehumanizing imagery of indigenous people in the Americas in newspapers and things like that. And by about 1890, you see a distinct lack of humanity in popular depictions of indigenous people in North America. One of the side effects of this, or one of the symptoms of this, is that it is very difficult to get real information about things like timelines, technology levels, and things like that. And a lot of material is dismissed because when new discoveries are made, they go against the momentum of what is already present in the academic, or the body of academic research. I say that I have a friend who is a translator of Mayan, and when I was at university, when I was at BYU, the standard assumption was that the Mayan culture existed between 600 BC and roughly right before Columbus came, with the Mayan culture being in its heyday in the 10th century and collapsing within a period of about 150 years, until it was just, there was really not much left. They'd already destroyed themselves by the time Columbus came. What is fascinating is my friend, who's a translator and has researched this, was able to prove that the Maya were here at least 1,000 years earlier. And their heyday was actually from about 600 BC to about 1000 AD, which makes them about, the classical Mayan culture lasted for more than 3 times longer than classical Roman culture did in the Western Roman Empire. Which, I mean, that's something that just kind of blows me away, because most of us, I mean, we don't even realize that. We don't even think about that. And this is like, from that kind of information, this is not an accurate timeline, but it kind of gives us an idea of perhaps how some of these Mesoamerican empires could have related. And there are some other ideas that we're talking about too, like Olmecs are generally going to be northern South America, Central America. Maya is going to be Central America, Yucatan, and Aztec is going to be pretty much around, centered around Mexico City, but they have there's evidence that they had control over a lot of even down the western coast of South America, all the way down Chile. And we can say stuff like that, but what's fascinating is finding things like Aztec copper in Montana, finding that there's evidence of at least 3 Mayan outposts in the state of Florida, and Mayan city in national forest, under a national forest canopy in the state of Georgia. The reality is the Maya loved a particular blue clay that they used in all their dyeing, used in all their paint, used in their decorations. They would coat their skins with it and then swim. But there's evidence, so much evidence. I mean, there's evidence that they use so much of this blue clay that where they actually were and their known mines, and for example, the Yucatan, could not produce as much of this particular blue clay that there is evidence that they used. And what's fascinating is that there are other deposits that have been found in Florida and then Georgia as well, and there's evidence of Mayan carvings and things like that, and Maya language in those states as well. Is this stuff that any of you have ever heard about before? It's stuff that most people have no idea. Yeah, Ryan.
I've heard of it in terms of like a anomaly, like a kind of a fluke thing that, maybe some Mayans had got lost at sea and stumbled into modern day United States of America, but not anything like a permanent outpost. That's pretty cool.
Well, and that's a lot of the times that's how it's presented. The problem is that there are 3 distinct spots in Florida where indigenous Americans living there have anywhere from 10 to 25% of a vocabulary overlap with traditional Maya. And in Georgia, the site that I'm talking about, it is a under the canopy. Have you guys heard of something called LIDAR? It's basically radar that sees through trees. A guy was able to map out a city that is laid out exactly like established Mayan cities in the Yucatan, in one of the national parks in Georgia. And that would have taken, with the technologies available to the time and barring alien intervention, it would have taken anywhere from 50 to 125 years to build the site. So there's, so the idea that these are somehow flukes, if up to 25% of a culture's vocabulary overlaps, that's evidence of a lot more than just a fluke. Do you know what I mean? And if they spent 2 generations building a city, that kind of speaks to it. And there is a guy named Scott Walter who has a TV show called Unearthing History, I believe, on the History Channel. And he's a forensic geologist, but he talks about a lot of this, and it's absolutely fascinating. And what I love about hearing about him is that he's actually able to demonstrate and give citations for the information. that he's delivering, which is really great. But anyway, all that aside, what I'm basically saying is that there's a lot more to what we think we understand, or a lot more to what the reality than what we think we understand. For example, I know that you guys were probably taught the same thing that I was, that humankind arrived to North America by crossing the land bridge connecting Russia to Alaska. And the interesting thing about that is that there's a lot of evidence that people have been coming over here a lot. In the Smithsonian institution, there is a flake of chert that was found in Virginia in a level that means that it has been in the ground for at least 700 years, which predates Columbus, that has Aramaic on it. And it's a particular form of Aramaic that was written by people in Jerusalem between 120 AD and 300 AD. So somehow that made it over here at that time. And then there's more and more evidence that showing that, well, during the Ice Age, you could walk from Europe all the way over to North America easily. And between 80 and 90% of Neanderthal settlements, it's estimated, are underwater now because of all the water being locked up. And then, of course, I mentioned in this that Kennewick Man, that's near where I grew up, dates on him have varied between 9 and 15,000 years old. And what's really interesting is forensic reconstruction of his features. He looks very much like a Polynesian, which would not surprise me at all. The Polynesians are among the most accomplished explorers in the history of humankind. So it wouldn't surprise me. But, and then, of course, you also have the Chinchorro mummies. These guys are the world's oldest mummies. And what's fascinating about them is people who died, they were skinned, the meat was boiled off their bones were packed with, surrounded by clay, and then the skin was stitched together and put over them again. And then clay was put over their faces to give them a round face with smiling features and eyes. Very surreal looking, but they're anywhere from 2 to 3 times older than the surviving Egyptian mummies, which is, I find, a little bit unsettling. But it's fascinating. So there's a lot more going on than we assume we know. Now, the Yucatan Peninsula, what's interesting about this is the Spanish, when they came here, Isabel was horrified by Columbus's treatment of the indigenous peoples. And she was horrified by what the conquistadors were doing, because she said, if we are claiming this land as Spain, these people are Spanish. They're Spaniards, and they should be treated like fellow countrymen. But her husband completely ignored her because he loved the money. He and the Pope at the time loved the money coming in. And it is estimated that between Columbus landing and the mid 1800s, more than 92%, listen to that number carefully, 92% of the indigenous populations of North and South America were decimated by what the conquistadors were doing, as well as disease. Let that number soak in for just a minute. Yeah, Ryan.
Oops, I clicked the wrong one. LOL. This is before like the big colonization movements and the big permanent settles across the continents.
This is between 1492 and 1850. So, this as right before the huge kickoff of Manifest Destiny, as the U.S. was colonizing the indigenous peoples. And, that just absolutely terrible. But what's one of one of the things that's interesting to me is when the Spanish came in, they would the conquistadors would send out monks to try to understand the language and try to share some communication. And what is no, I'm sorry, the date is wrong. It's between 1492 and about 1880. So we do get, that is counting for a lot of the genocides that were happening in the late 1800s as well. But the conquistadors would send out translators where the monks would try to learn the native language and then translate for the conquistadors. And finding out from a Mayan speaker, a native speaker of Maya, that Yucatan, what actually happened, how this got its name on all the Spanish maps, was the monks landed on the shore and were trying to ask people living there, what is the name of this area? And everybody that they asked, the word they kept hearing was Yucatan. And so that's how it got its name, Yucatan Peninsula. The problem is that in Quiché Maya, Yucatan means, huh? They could not understand the Spanish monks. So that whole peninsula is named what? Which I think is pretty awesome. Well, we get the protoculture that, this is called the protoculture because there's evidence that artifacts of this culture were here long before others that we can identify as more familiar, like Maya and Aztec. The Olmec produced a lot of things like these mammoth heads. This is, he's considered a wrestler, but I don't know if he's doing the funky chicken or what. But what's fascinating about a lot of the facial features, and I love this particularly in that whole, the ancient aliens kind of stuff, is that you see a lot of evident Asiatic features and a lot of features from people from Africa. And what is interesting to me is, one of the things that we've seen over and over again is that people will stylize features and imagery to reflect what is important in their culture. Like, the Greeks would distort and use, perfect, so-called perfect ratios, and because that was part of what they were doing. And then we saw with the Mesopotamia and Etruscans, eyes, and Egyptians, eyes would look very different. And I don't know if when we look at the Olmec things, you'll be able to see, oh yeah, that does look like they came from Asia, or that does look like they came from Africa. But I don't think that we can say that that means that people actually did, or that proves that they did. I think what we can say is whatever they were demonstrating in the features, that was important to them. That stylization, the naturalization, whatever it was important to them. So I don't think that we can use Olmec artifacts to prove the ancient alien hypothesis. I'm sorry, Ryan. I know that's a disappointment, but there it is. One of the most culturally advanced by, and I say this with big foam finger air quotes, cultures is the Maya. They were definitely the most literate of the records that we're aware of. The Spanish monks talked about huge buildings and rooms filled with books that were written that went back centuries, records of political things, historical events. One of the oldest things that look like that are reminiscent of this kind of Mayan pictograph is a rock that was found in Georgia that records an astronomical event that's about 5,000 years old. And it looks like it could potentially be Mayan, but it's hard to say for sure. But what's interesting is that my friends who translate this kind of stuff said that they would write sometimes in rebus, so the picture would look like what it was supposed to be. They would write like the European alchemists would do in things where you would have to sound it out and say it. And even though it didn't look like regular writing, you'd say it out loud because it was sounds and then would sound like something, or it would sound similar to something like an audible pun, or sometimes it would be sounds that would be individual letters. And it's so it's a very confusing language to write, because when people would write it, they would just enjoy the process of recording. You know, they made it fun for themselves. And what is really amazing to me, and I devastatingly sad, is that the Spanish monks talk about libraries, that, you know, entire huge buildings. This time in Europe, libraries typically were like large rooms, and here in the Americas, libraries for the Maya were gigantic buildings sometimes. But the word came down from the Catholic Church, and they systematically destroyed all the literature that the Maya had produced over 2,500 years, and they destroyed it all. And now there's only 4 books that remain in the world that are known, you know, out of buildings of books. And then we get the Aztec. And what's fascinating to me is you can see there is a lot of visual overlap and relation between what we see with the Maya writing and the Aztec imagery. And of course, the Aztecs, their entire, for the Maya, their empire lasted for a long time because the leaders felt that it was their responsibility to perform blood sacrifice for their followers. And blood sacrifice meant if God was pervasive and God was everywhere and you were God, then a drop of your blood would be sufficient. And their society did not start collapsing until they actually practiced human sacrifice in about the 13th century. And then because, you know, human sacrifice, large scale human sacrifice, is not going to be sustainable for a long-term solution if that's what you use to as a form of worship. And then of course you get the Aztecs that just brought that to a whole new level, with the Spanish talking about rivers of blood flowing down the sides of temples where people were sacrificed, as long as it took to slaughter one person, then they would take another person, do the same thing. And this is what drove Aztec warfare, was to conquering neighboring people for the primary purpose of getting live bodies to continue the human sacrifice. And, you know, that simply is not sustainable. And, as you know, as a conquering nation, because at some point you're going to run out of bodies to sacrifice. But there were other kingdoms as well in Mesoamerica, and we will talk about the Mississippi River cultures later on. But it's really very interesting to me. A lot of really fascinating stuff. Some of the things that these cultures are known for is the fact that they were very good at building calendars. The Maya and the Aztec were. And a big reason for that was because it was very important within their culture to be aware of who needed what attention paid to them on each day of the year, each moment of the year. And batuns or cycles were something that everybody paid attention to. You guys are aware that the world ended 2012 on December 22nd. You guys knew about that? That with my Maya friends, that was a big deal, and it is a big deal. The Maya believed that every cycle gave a chance for a rebirth, and the rebirth was metaphysical rebirth of the world and of the person. So that the end of the Great Batoon meant that everybody had a chance to start over again, and it served the same role in Mayan culture as the year of Jubilee did for the Hebrews. So it wasn't.
I
Yes, what's that, Milo?
I remember in middle school or intermediate school, my library had made like a big thing, and they said in big letters, "Oh Maya, the end is Naya."
Yeah, and it was the end of the old world and the birth of the new. Most of us didn't even know that anything had happened, but it was the same kind of thing. It was meant to be a forgiving of debts, reestablishment of the a re-empowerment of the self, and a moment of personal transformation. So sadly, the alien overlords didn't do anything, at least not openly. One can still hope, but I really hope you guys, when I talk about aliens and stuff like that, I really hope you guys all understand it is very tongue in cheek. And I really enjoy talking about it because if any of the people producing those programs actually took a moment to understand the visual iconography of what they're using to prove alien intervention, they would be rather embarrassed. So this is a stone mask. What is absolutely fascinating to me about a lot of the stoneworking that we see with these Mesoamerican cultures is that a lot of this stuff is like the American jade and or raw stone that is particularly difficult to work and to polish. And it's evident to me that they really knew what they were doing. And it is astounding to see what they could do, because with the tools that survive that anthropologists believe that they had access to, a lot of the engineering that they left for us to see seems like it should have been impossible. And I think what that proves conclusively is that our ancestors were smart and knew what they were doing. You know, if we can't figure out how they did what they did with the tools that we know that they had, you know that they really had a handle on how to use their own equipment. And I think it's a pretty weak argument to say, well, obviously somebody was helping them, or they couldn't have done this with the tools they had access to. Because how many of you have seen chopsticks? Has any of you seen chopsticks? How many of you know how to use them? You know, okay, Mark, you know how to use them? Jacob, Milo? I can pick up silverware. Oh, you, Milo, you don't? I can pick up silverware with my chopstick and use a fork with my chopstick and eat with the fork. But that's an anomaly. I was raised downwind of 5 nuclear power plants. I have mutant skills. The fact that we know that chopsticks exist, the fact that we know that they're there, we can pick them up in a store, does not mean we know how to use them. And so the fact that the tools are there and we know what the tools were does not mean we know how they use the tools to do these amazing things. So I think that just another evidence these guys are smart. Now, if we look at this map, the Olmec presence, this does not mean this is where their influence was. What this means is this is evidence of their artifacts. This is where their artifacts were found. But it looks like to me, if we look at their artwork, it looks like to me, like with this headdress and stuff, you see echoes of that in what the Aztec and Maya were doing. And so I think we can make the argument that, yeah, even though the Olmec, their artifacts are only found right here, I think that culturally they influenced a lot of people. Now, I promised that we would touch on the 4 elements of artistic critique. And I want to talk about that really briefly with this. The first is what? Anybody? What's the first tool of artistic critique?
Description.
Description. So this is an Olmec head. to describe it, it looks like a fairly blocky head, a portrait done of somebody, but it's about maybe 6, 7 feet tall, 6, 7 feet wide. It looks like it's made out of something like basalt. We can see that there are definite facial features representing a human being, or what we believe is a human being, and enough that one of you could probably even draw what this person might have looked like. And it looks like to me that there's something here representing either a stylized hairdo or a helmet of sorts, or a crown, perhaps. And so we're just describing it. What's the second step of artistic critique?
Interpretation?
Interpretation, yes. I'm sorry, no, that's the third step. The second one is analysis. So yes, Mark, we'll get to interpretation in just a second. And for analysis, this is where we start talking about how did the artist make this? Well, first, it's obvious that it was important to them, and we'll slide into what Mark was saying in interpretation, and I'll talk about why that's obvious. But as far as analysis goes, it looks to me like whoever made this, they had to be very comfortable with working with stone, not just chiseling, but also polishing. And the features look very refined and smooth. They had to have something like akin to what we would recognize as chisels, perhaps. It looks to me like this would have been a lot of work. They would have had to draw the face out, perhaps on the face of the stone, and then chisel away, and then also work at it quite a bit to polish it down so it was smooth. And then the third step, like Mark said, is interpretation. I think we can interpret that this is important, and it was somebody that represented something important to the society or community that built this. The reason I say that is it is a big stone. It is heavy and required a lot of human effort to move to where it is. And this was found in the middle of a field. So what I would suggest what that means as far as interpreting is that when if the culture bears any resemblance to our culture today, if there's evidence of a significant amount of effort, that usually means or implies that the effort was for something that's important. Carving a hard stone, and this is granite, which is very difficult to carve. Moving a very heavy stone, I believe that this weighs about several tons. What that is evident to me is that whoever this person is or what they represent was very important to the culture. So if this is a specific person, it would represent somebody who is a leader, perhaps a king, queen, or emperor, empress. And or it represents an idea of a very important leader so perhaps leadership in general, or maybe even divinity. That they are looking toward that the people feel that it's very important, and this is somehow a votary for a human formed deity. But whatever the case, it means to me that this was very important to them. And the fact that there's dozens of these and they have varying features, and the features seem to be reflective of individuals rather than idealized human form, I think that perhaps we could make an argument that these are portraits of individuals and probably portraits of social leaders. And then the last tool is evaluation. And I think that, the big question, is this successful? The fact that this outlives the culture, I would say whoever built it, it was successful. The fact that it is so old is remarkable to me. And, the idea that it is only 3,000 years old, I would think that we could make an argument that it is quite a bit older than that with the things that are coming out. That date comes from academic momentum. But as we are finding more and more, as dating is getting more and more accurate. We're finding that a lot of these artifacts that were dated as using essentially a colonizing model or colonialist model, we're finding that these dates are a lot older. Like, for example, one of the cultures that we will look at is Yoruba, Ife kingdoms. In the 1930s, while England still had, and European countries still had a lot of colonies in the continent of Africa. In Nigeria, I want to say Nigeria, I believe it was, a bronze head was found that was created by Yoruba artisans. And it was assumed that it was only a couple hundred years old because it was photorealistic and it was beautifully made. It was bought for $15 and then given to an English museum. Subsequently, over the next 20 years, it was found the area that it was recovered from was probably at least 400 or 500 years old. So immediately doubled the date. And by the late 1950s, it was realized that maybe this was 800, 900 years old. So almost doubling the date again. And then most recently, in the last 20 years, people realized this is most likely anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 years old, this bronze head. And it was, even in the 50s, it was really hard for anybody to believe it could be older than that, because if this bronze head that is photorealistic and beautifully made is 2,000 years old, what does that mean for the conceit that the Renaissance was the height of culture in that part of the world? You know, it would be devastating. Of course, the Chinese bronzing was okay because those were only bells that are, 2,500 years old. But the fact that, when I'm going to tell you something that's really heartbreaking, there's photographic evidence of this. When Belgium had their colonies in Africa, they left the governance of those colonies to the people on site. And if a family did not produce enough, it was routine for extra children or extra wives to be slaughtered in front of the family heads to incentivize them to reinvigorate their efforts and grow more crops for Belgium. That is how little a lot of these colony governors felt. That was how little they gave the human life that in those areas. And this is 1890, 1910, right around that area. So when we talk about how old these things are, keep in the back of your mind, it is probably a lot older. Whatever we're looking at, especially when the body of knowledge that we get is derived from colonial sources. So I'm sorry that is a real big downer, and it's horrifying. It really is. So what I want you to do is look at as many of these as you possibly can. There are some amazing things to see in Olmec art. This is from the magazine that I have you look at. Look at these faces. Some of them are made from sandstone. Some of them are made from other things, like granite. And in every case, I think they really demonstrate a strong facility for capacity for creation, and it's just absolutely amazing. What is really amazing to me, this is an Olmec figure, but I mean, it's astounding to me that somebody making this thousands of years ago, this looks like it's a lot more recent. It looks like it's a chubby baby getting ready to pick its own nose. It's fascinating to me how relatable a lot of these objects are. So I'm going to switch to Maya, Maya culture. But before I get to that, I want to, one of the things that many anthropologists just assume, and I think there is evidence in a lot of cultural clashes that there is perhaps some justification to the assumption that when one culture disappears and another culture comes on the scene, it's a result of a violent conflict. That is a holdover from Darwinian theories of evolution. And one of the things that we talked about, what does it appear to be, today's understanding of evolution? What does evolution appear to be driven by as opposed to what Darwin thought?
Was it collaboration and like community?
Yeah, Darwin said that it's always survival of the fittest, and it's always who survives the violence. But it appears to be more and more that how cultures and creatures evolved there may be a lot more to do with collaboration and cooperation. On the news, well, if you look at all the problems that happen, natural disasters and stuff like that, 9 times out of 10, people drop what they're doing to help all the time. And that happens more than 90% of the time. But you look at the news, and the news is 22 minutes of activity that are designed to get you engaged. It's designed to shock you. It's the most horrible. And it's out of 200 billion hours each day of human activity condensed to 22 minutes of the most salacious and nasty, more often than not. And I think that is awful. If we look at from the Ural Mountains, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, there were a group of people that were among the first to actually show that they had domesticated the horse because they had created bridles. They made it all the way into the Gobi Desert in China. And this information started coming out about 15 years ago because the Chinese government kept the information from leaking out, even though it was discovered in the 90s. There were tombs found in the Gobi Desert of people from the Ural Mountains who were blonde and redheads that were 5.5 to over 6 feet tall. And they disappeared. The culture completely disappeared. But their legacy is in the green eyes that are found occasionally in the Chinese population. And occasionally you will find people with red hair in the Chinese population. And it's because of these immigrants from the Ural Mountains. The assumption was by a lot of Chinese anthropologists that they were killed because they looked different. Until in the late 90s, a professor started dating these tombs and trying to find relationships between what he found in the tombs and the relationship of their calendrical age to each other. So the oldest tombs have the blonde and redhead giants, and the more recent ones have slightly shorter people with blonde and red hair. And he started doing genetic testing with the mummies that he found. What he determined was that the people in the Gobi Desert did not slaughter the Europeans because they looked different. Just over a period of about 400 years, these blondes and redheads cross-pollinated with the culture, fell in love with them, had babies, and everybody started looking like the native population. And it was because there were a lot more people that looked like the people in Gobi than the few hundred that came from the Ural Mountains. So they disappeared not because they were slaughtered, but because they fell in love with the people that were already there. When I was your age, I was told that Cro-Magnon and Homo erectus kind of took over and created modern humans because they slaughtered the Neanderthals because they looked different. in reality, the three principal race groups that formed modern humans were the Neanderthals, the Cro-Magnon, and the Denisovans, which came from Western Russia. And their genetics are now in the genetics of every contemporary human, not because one culture slaughtered everybody else, but because when they met, they got along and started having children together. That's why we have the genetics. That's why people today have red hair, is because of our Neanderthal ancestors. That's why there's tall people today, because of our Denisovan ancestors. And people have brown hair today because of our Cro-Magnon ancestors. And so when you hear things like this and cultures come together, one culture may disappear not because of conflict or because they were slaughtered, but it may be that they either lost interest in being different, or they found something more cool on the horizon. They went somewhere, they started having children, and they fell in love with the culture that was emerging. It does not have to be, like Darwin said, that one group killed the other. And I think that that is a pretty hopeless and devastating perspective on the universe at large. That's not the only rationale for one culture disappearing. So, keep that in mind. I say that because the Olmecs did disappear, but you can see echoes of their artwork in all the other cultures in Mesoamerica, all the other empires. So I think it's less that they were killed and more that they kind of suffused into the cultures around them. But that's my personal opinion. But I think that there's enough evidence to demonstrate that, or to at least support the idea that cultures fall in love with each other. They don't have to kill each other. But neither here nor there, but it is a different way of thinking than a lot of us would have been taught. And if you guys don't want to agree, that's perfectly fine. Now, this panel, does anybody recognize this panel? This is remarkable. This guy is, I don't know if he was a really nice guy. My suspicion is that he was like every other long-lasting leader, making choices that he had to because it wasn't a good choice. It wasn't a happy choice, but it was a choice that he felt was necessary for the survival and continuance of his people. This is Hana Pakal II, and in Palenque, and this is his sarcophagus lid. What have you been told about the longevity of humans? From 2,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago to 500 years ago to today. What is the general rule of thumb for our understanding of how long people have lived? Anybody? Have you heard about this? As nutrition changes and as people take care of themselves, it seems like lifespans increase. And maybe 2,000 years ago, the average death age was under 40. Maybe mid 40s by about the Renaissance. And then it dropped during the Industrial Revolution, sadly. But then after that, what's the average lifespan today? You guys know? About 15 years ago. Yeah, Ryan.
Something like 75 for men and 78 for women globally.
Yeah, pretty much. And if you are in a culture where the kingship is hereditary, what has European history taught us about how long a king lasts? It seems like as soon as you get the crown, I mean, your days are numbered, and there are some exceptions to that, but it may be 15, 25 years. Anybody want to guess how long Hana Pakal II lasted as a king? You will not believe this. I guarantee you will not believe this. Keeping in mind he was probably early mid-20s when he rose to power. 85 years. That's how long he was emperor of the Maya Empire. So this guy is astounding. The fact that he was able to make it more make it more important for the people around him to keep him alive because he represented stability and prosperity than the alternative. The fact that he was able to do that for 85 years is astounding. And the fact that he lived that long is astounding. My suspicion is that he probably, like King Tut, was a teenager when he became the emperor. But still, that is an astonishing length of time for the ancient world. All the way back to, Zechariah Sitchin and Mesopotamian kings, and biblical kings lasting for, or the prophets, the patriarchs lasting for hundreds of years. I mean, it almost feels like it's out of a video game. It doesn't seem real, but there's enough evidence that people believe that he lasted for 85 years. Now, when you look at this, there's a lot of people that say that this represents him being in a spaceship, and you can kind of see that he's laying back on his back like astronauts might, and it looks like there's little controls and stuff like that here, and it looks like he's wearing some sort of technological devices. And I included on this an image where somebody made a reconstruction of what his spaceship looked like, which I love that. I found this on Pinterest, and I could not find who had actually made it, but I think that's really awesome. But I want to talk a little bit about what this actually means for the Maya. Now, keep in mind, the Maya did practice blood sacrifice at this time. And Maya royalty felt that they were gods. They were deities, with an idea that gods are infinite and not to be comprehended in their fullness by mortal minds. So if you believe in blood sacrifice, that blood is needed to bring the sun up every day and for the proper things to happen that need to happen. If you are already God and the God is the one providing the blood sacrifice, and you are aware of ideas of infinity, how much of infinity is a fraction of infinity? It still represents deity and infinity. And so the Maya royalty would puncture themselves and just put a couple drops on some paper that they would then burn. And that represented the entirety of the blood sacrifice, because with this connection with God and deity and infinity and all that kind of stuff, a couple of drops of blood represented a sea of blood. So it was just perfectly fine. And what this little thing right here represents is a stingray spine. And traditionally, stingray spines were used to puncture the skin for the blood sacrifice. And this typically meant that the emperor or empress would puncture herself or himself. And generally, since there is anthropological evidence to support this, and it's nasty, everybody's going to cringe. The empress would usually puncture herself in her lady bits, and the emperor would puncture himself in his manly bits. And I will let you interpret that however you want, but it would be supremely painful. And then they would take that and burn it. And this idea is that the infinite sacrifice of blood would then be wafted into the heavens by the tongues of smoke. And so up here you see imagery that feels like clouds, or tendrils that feel like clouds right here. These are tendrils of clouds, and these will represent either smoke or like right here, billowing clouds, billowing smoke. It does not represent rocket exhaust, sadly. He is laying down because he is both dying, but also in the process of dying, he is reborn as a god in both the heavens and on earth. And so this represents both the fetus and his dying form. The hands represent specifically when the creator or the creatrix planted the first tree. The left hand held the tree, the right hand was on top, and those hands rotated to plant the tree. And this represents kind of rotating the hands to plant that tree. So even though in the process of dying, he is connected with the creator God himself, because the Maya understood that his body was just an extension of the infinite deity. And all of these things are referencing to numbers and calendrical or calendar dates, the important events of his life, the important events of deity, the proper apportioning of respect during the year. And these will also represent things like the sun, and there are elements of stars and the moon around here to connect him with the sky. And so we look at this and we start seeing, okay, these exhaust plumes, what do these actually represent, the exhaust plumes? What did we just talk about?
The smoke of them burning the blood.
Yeah, and it's a direct connection between him, personal sacrifice, and engaging deity. And then when we look at the controls, the so-called controls that he's manipulating, these are elements of the natural world. His hands are mimicking how the creator planted the first tree. He is engaging Hanapakal II as God Emperor of the Maya, is engaging the universe in a constructive detail to protect and service his people. So not only is he becoming one with the idea of deity in the universal godliness of the universe, but he is also engaging very specifically as the body of Hanapakal, returning to the ancestors as an emissary of his people. And so it's astounding to me how much is going on here. And you can see remnants of plants, you can see living things, you can see celestial objects and stuff like that, where he is connecting both all these ideas of deity together. And I think it's fascinating. We don't have to devolve to an idea that perhaps this is a spaceship. But I do have a little bit right here that I think is astounding. I say astounding because some of it is patently ridiculous. But I want you to go through here, look at the Smart History Art of the Maya and see what they do. Look at Maya writing and the codexes that have been found. And look at some of these things that are just amazing. Now, Palenque is the seat of Hanapakal's power. And this video shows a little bit about what's some of these they say secrets of the Maya revealed, but when this first site was first come upon, this is what it looked like. It was overgrown, and in the interim, people have been trying to restore this, find out about it, clean it up, re-beautify it, and there are some really fascinating things about what's going on when you see these masks. Some of them look like they are stylized deities. Some of them almost look like funeral masks or death masks, almost, because of how unflattering they look. But it shows different elements of crowns and different things like that. There are some things that are really fascinating as you explore the Mayan stuff that you see. In Chichen Itza, which is one of the Mayan cities, There are stelas, and a stela is another word for it's basically a relief carving on a stone slab. But when you say it in Latin, it sounds so much more impressive. And in some of these stelas, you will see rows on rows of emperors, Mayan emperors, who are essentially these god emperors. And they are holding in one hand a globe, and in the other hand, they're holding a staff. I don't know if you guys remember any of, I don't know if you've already taken more recent art history classes, but if you look up medieval European royalty and look at the paintings, when they are painted in their robes of state, they are wearing all these incredibly beautiful embroidered fabrics that looks like the knitted fabrics that you see on the stelas of Mayan emperors. They're holding in one hand a globe that represented the world that they are saying they are in control of, which is reminiscent of what the Mayan royalty were holding. And then they are also holding a staff that for the Christians in Europe, at least, the Christian kings, is supposed to recall to your mind the Bible. The Greek word for measuring is logos. It's also it also means word. It means idea. And in the Aramaic New Testament, John wrote that Christ was the logos, or the measuring staff, for which all morality should be compared to. And so when European royalty would hold this stick in their hand, they're trying to subliminally remind you and connect themselves with the logos of the body of Christ. And it's fascinating to me that the Maya stelas would have similar iconography. I don't know what it meant for them, but when the conquistadors were coming to the Maya and seeing this, they were seeing things like the heart tree of the Maya, where this tree of life seemed to be very similar or parallel to the tree of life in the Bible. They were seeing this imagery that they were familiar with the Spanish and other European royalty from Europe. Then you get, and you can look this up on the internet, you get this idea that St. Thomas, one of the things he did after stabbing his hand in, that the spear wound of the body, the side of Christ, he stuck his finger through the holes and he put his hand in the wound on Christ's side. But for the rest of his life, he was intrepid in going everywhere around in the world that he could to preach as an apostle, to be a witness of the resurrected Savior. And there's evidence of his journeys in India. He went to North Africa, and then he disappeared for several years. Nobody knows where he went, but the Spanish conquistadors decided that meant he went to South and Central America. And that's why the Maya had these iconography that was so familiar to people that used biblical iconography. And whether or not that's true, I have no idea, but I think it would be so awesome if it was. And there is, if you look up Anonymous 4, it's a group of 4 women who sing generally Baroque music. They have something that is called On the Breath of God, is one of their albums. And it is a selection of Spanish Baroque music inspired by stories of St. Thomas, who was blown across the Atlantic Ocean by the breath of God to minister to the Maya, and one of these conquistador legends. So that's something interesting to find out about. I just think that's really interesting. But you can kind of see why the Spanish would be scratching their heads, if you see a lot of this relatively familiar iconography. Okay, is everybody ready to get really depressed? You guys happy to get depressed? Okay. As we look at this stuff, keep in mind those 4 tools of artistic critique. And I demonstrated how to use them on the Olmec head. Remember what those 4 tools are again? What's the first one? Starts with a D.
Description.
Right. Second one, it starts with an A.
Analysis.
Analyze.
Yep, excellent. Third one, Mark, starts with an I. You guys remember what the third tool is?
Interpret.
Interpret, excellent. What's the fourth one? Starts with an E.
Evaluate.
Yes, excellent. So as we look at all the stuff that we do, keep those things in mind and start using that as a framework as you examine this work that we look at, okay? Excuse me. Okay, these guys, technologically, they were amazing. And as you look at the stuff, these guys developed, they were using a sword that people believe the Maya may have invented, that they adapted. And this sword was, it basically looks like a cricket bat with slivers, or not slivers, but blades of obsidian mounted all the way around the edge. And a Spanish conquistador said that he saw somebody decapitating a horse running at a full gallop with one of these swords. They were brutal, but they were designed specifically to incapacitate whoever you were trying to conquer so you could bring them back alive for a sacrifice. And I think that this imagery demonstrates that it wasn't just Aztec men that fought on the field. Why would I say that? Apply the four tools of artistic critique to that top right-hand figure and tell me what you're seeing.
She's female.
Yep. It is a real live girl person. And what's she carrying? What are this? What does that look like? It looks like to me a couple spears. Would you guys say that that's what it looks like? It looks like to me that this is a woman who is one of the warriors and she has captured a prisoner to bring back. And he does not appear very happy. So the Aztecs terrified a lot of territory. And this is where the Aztec Empire was. And let's see it in 1519. But it looks like the Aztec Empire, the Olmecs were around for people's guess, maybe 1,000 years, something like that. The Maya were around from about 1600 BC to about 1300 AD. So what is that? Almost 3,000 years. The Romans were around from about 450 BC to about 400, or Western Romans to about 400 AD. And then Constantine's Rome in the East were around for about 1500, for about a little bit over 1,000 years as well. So the Maya were around for almost 3 times the length of Western Rome. And if we factor in Eastern Rome as well, almost double the length of the Roman Empire. I mean, it just blows me away. But by comparison, the Aztecs were only around for a couple hundred years. But they terrified a lot of people. And it looks like there's evidence of their artifacts. This is just a map of Central America. Montana is up here. And there's Aztec copper that's been found in Montana. And there's suggested that there's evidence of their influence in Peru. So this is what the strongest evidence shows of the the height of their power, but they could have terrified an awful lot of people. Their artwork I wanted to show something that I think is absolutely amazing. One of the things that they did that is astounding is they built a divine city in a place that nobody else could build in. And I think one of the reasons they could do that, they did that, was to demonstrate their power to whoever came as an emissary, and being an emissary to the Aztec Empire, I do not think was very pleasant, because these guys could kick anybody's trash. I mean, they were terrifying, and you knew that as long as there were only two options: they could take you over by force and then kill everybody, or you could be a vassal, and they would just extract people volunteered to go to them for sacrifice. It just not very pleasant. But this is something that this is where I believe Mexico City is now. But I want to just have you watch this. It's only about 2 minutes, and I think this demonstrates their architectural prowess. Okay, so hopefully all of you can hear that. If you can't, speak up.
Was formerly an island that fed 200,000 inhabitants from floating gardens called Chinampas. During the Aztec.
Okay, how big was London at the beginning of the 16th century? Anybody want to guess? I don't know. I'm just asking.
I'm pretty sure it was smaller than Tenochtitlan as far as population goes. I think only Paris and Venice were bigger.
Well, and this city, there's 200,000 people in this area with the technology that they had at the time. That is something to think about. I think it's remarkable.
Empire, the island in the middle of the Lake Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, was the biggest and best fed city in the world and completely surrounded by water. They survived from floating gardens that converted the marshy wetlands of the lake into arable farmland. Each garden was 300 feet long by 30 feet wide. To make a garden, workers weaved sticks together to form a giant raft, and then piled mud from the bottom of the lake on top of the raft to create a layer of soil 3 feet thick. The rectangular gardens were anchored to the lake by willow trees planted at the corners. Each garden was lined on all sides by canals to allow canoes to pass with workers and materials. This network of gardens extended for 22,000 acres across the surface of the lake. The floating gardens were companion planted with corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, peppers, and flowers. In 15...
Does anybody know what companion planting is? Another term for this are the sisters. Corn, squash, and beans, each of them will deplete specific elements from the soil and replenish specific elements. Hey, Mark, your microphone's on.
Yeah, I was about to say the three sisters.
Oh yeah. You're absolutely right. It's the three sisters. Why are they called the three sisters?
I mean, like you said, you plant them together one after another as part of crop rotation.
Yeah, and they each will replenish the things that the other plants will extract from the soil. And this is the root for a lot of dishes, a lot of food preparation from our indigenous Americans with these three sisters coming together. And what is fascinating to me about this is that this was something that these guys knew to do, and crop rotation was something that was instituted by European colonizers relatively recently. That was something that they came up with relatively recently, and these guys knew about it for a long time. And the reality is that people that are generational farmers understand these kinds of principles. But it is fascinating to me that in today's world, this almost feels revolutionary. This is the kind of thing that was taught to a lot of Ethiopian farmers at the end of the 80s by a lot of Dene agrarian experts that went over to. Did you guys know this? That Navajo agrarian experts went over to Ethiopia at the end of the 80s to teach them how to overcome their devastating drought. Did you guys know that? And so I just think that stuff like that is fascinating. So returning to our regularly scheduled podcast.
19, they were discovered by Cortez and the Spanish conquistadors, who documented the incredible self-sufficient city before ordering the destruction of the Chinampas floating gardens. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you.
So I think that it is it's interesting to me that the technology required to build something like that. And I think it fits squarely within the realm of art history, because this is part of the architectural history of the people in the area. When Cortez and the others started building Mexico City, they actually built it on something called the Heavenly City Diagram. And it was ironically a map that was generated from the descriptions of the city of heaven given by Paul the Apostle and John the Revelator. So these are the guys that are responsible for killing 92% of the indigenous population, and then they set about recreating the city of heaven. There is no irony there whatsoever, is there? Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. I saw your face. I agree with you completely. But I want you to, look at these videos that I have, go through them, explore them, and see what you can learn. Some of the stuff that I wanted to look at, most of this stuff is videos for you to watch. But I also wanted to show us just some visual imagery as well. I like the videos because it kind of helps to provide a little bit of context. Oh, and I'm having a hard time. Oh, this is irritating. I'm having a hard time connecting with the article that I wanted to share with you. Okay, can you guys, am I back? Can you guys see me and hear me again? Okay. I'm backtracking a little bit. For the Maya, remember I mentioned that there is a particular blue that they use. It was a pigment that was found in a particular clay. In the Yucatan Peninsula, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that because of the way the Yucatan was formed anciently, there are a lot of these almost vertical tubes that are all through the rock strata everywhere. And these vertical tubes, they go down maybe 20 to 50 feet, but they fill up with water and then they remain with water. And if you can imagine, the water's not going to drain, it's going to stay there for hundreds of years. The water's going to get kind of nasty in many areas. But the ones that do replenish themselves, can be used as dependable water sources, regardless of what the weather's doing. These are called cenotes. And in the Maya mythology, the realm of death is under the surface of the ground. And the area between, or the connecting areas between the underworld and the world that we live in, the veil is represented by water. And this is very similar to Celtic tradition as well, which is interesting. But in some of these cenotes, sacrifices would be painted with the blue, and this would be animals, sometimes people, but devices, things, objects would be painted with this blue clay and then thrown in. the water would rot away the wood and leave the clay at the bottom. Divers have found some of these cenotes filled with feet of clay. And just imagine for a while how long it would take for the clay to remain in silted layers that are feet thick with all the wood rotting away and no wood is remaining. This took place for over a long period of time. Anyway, that rambling gave us time to, hopefully the article has pulled up. Okay, yeah, and I can share it. I only have a couple minutes left, but I want you guys to look at, this is one of the articles that I have you go to. And I'm just going to share some of these things. One of the other cultures is Toltec. We did not go over those guys very, very much, but they look very similar to the Olmec and the Maya as well. We have these blocky, distorted human forms, which do not mean that people had no idea what they're doing. What it does mean is that there was something consistent with the symbology of the people at the time that made them respect this idea that the human form should look blocky when it's depicted. So I don't know what that is, but it's obvious. Look at those Olmec heads, they could do photorealistic rendering. But the Aztecs felt that they were the direct descendants of the Toltec, or at least the torchbearers of Toltec culture. And when we look at some of these things, you do see a lot of relations to human form. So it feels to me like when they were showing a depiction of deity, they identified with the deity, at least being appropriate to show it in human form. And you get Toltec, he's the guy that wears these goggles. And Toltec is responsible for water. And he was a big inspirer of Frank Lloyd Wright's later architecture. But I want you to look at some of this stuff that we see with Aztecs. We look at this at first hand, okay, that looks terrible. It looks like a gigantic snake is eating somebody. A snake with feathers. What if we talk about the Aztecs too? They had this idea of the underworld being underground, and the spirit realm being in the sky. The world of death is underneath. The world of life is up above. You have a serpent with feathers that can very well represent a divine connection with the underworld or death, and coupled with the capacity to fly or feathers. Maybe a unifying both the world of death with the world of life and the sky. We look at things like this with a mosaic. This looks like it was mosaic applied to a human skull. And at first it looks horrific to what we're familiar with, but many cultures, when they use human bones and human skulls, it's a reminder of the continuation of life. It's meant to be a symbol in many cases of the idea that the soul, whatever makes that person continues to live. It is not meant necessarily to be terrifying. You look at some of these other things. These are images that monks would paint and write about what, and this is how we know, or this is how we generate ideas of what perhaps different people wore. What Mayan royalty wore as opposed to what common folks wore. And so I definitely take time to look at that, but go over like Britannica talks about the timeline, and there's some interesting stuff about daily life, but definitely take the time to go through all that and look at it. All right, as we are separating for another week, any last questions or observations about stuff?
Not really related to the material at hand, but why do you have a halo background?
This is actually derived from Larry Niven's Ring World.
Oh, okay.
So this
It
is
looks like a Halo map. I know
yeah,
I know Ringworld is
Halo,
an influence on Halo, but
yeah, Halo draws a lot from I'm going to say foundational uh, sci-fi literature. So a lot of stuff that developed by Heinlein Asimov and Larry Niven, and this is particularly from the Ringworld series of novels, which
oh,
is
okay.
what I love about it. But yeah, it does not surprise me that it's a Halo background as well. But yeah, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love stuff, everything from uh, uh, H. Rider Haggard all the way to uh, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Heinlein, the Conan series, all that kind of stuff. I love all that stuff.
Nice. I think I started reading. I think I
You know,
started trying to read Dune.
over the last several years, I've noticed that all the A students are the ones that are able to point that out. So good luck, Mark. You're on the right
Thanks.
track. So any other comments, questions, or observations about the class? All right, great. If you guys do have any other questions, like I know that another project is coming up due. I want you to know, I know that you guys are not taking an online class because you have a normal, healthy schedule. All of you guys are wackadoodle, and that's perfectly fine. I'm sorry, I meant wacky. You all have wacky schedules. Um, and I am more than happy to be flexible. I know there's a couple of the students who are having a difficult time. Uh, just let me know. Keep me in the loop. I am perfectly happy to extend dates. And if you feel things are too crowded, let me know, and we'll talk about it as a class and perhaps even change things around a bit. But I want to talk more about uh, the projects and the final project next week. So hopefully one of you will remind me. But I do appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule to show up live. The people that are watching the recording of this, if the videos are not showing up to the watching class, just watch them on your own time. It means that may be edited out. Yes, Milo.
I was just wondering if you had finished grading the first discovery projects.
I'm no, it looks like I did not. I did do quite a bit, and I was almost caught up on Tuesday, and then a lot of people have turned in stuff since then. So I'm trying to stay caught up so that by the end of every week it's caught up. But I was kind of holding off on that because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings until most of the stuff got turned in. But that does remind me, and I want to say this really fast. Every time you don't get perfect points, read as to why, and then resubmit. Everybody can resubmit, and you can resubmit right up to the end of the semester. So keep that in mind. And the two most common issues are not turning in the right thing for the right assignment. And several of you have just turned right around and turned that back in. And the second most common issue is not getting your citations. Not getting the accessed on dates and not having the citations in correct MLA format. And we have 10 websites to look at. And there's also, I think, Milo, don't you work for the on-campus writing lab?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and that is definitely a resource to take advantage of. All right. Well, thank you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Have a good weekend.